So I love food. I love everything about food. I enjoy growing food, I enjoy cooking, and most of all, I enjoy eating. And I think I speak for most people when I say that. I hardly know anybody who would want to turn down a free meal. But even as a society, we love to eat so much, we hardly ever think about how our food choices are impacting our environment and ultimately impacting our planet. In the article titled "Why It's Green to Go Vegetarian," published in 2012 by the Vegetarian Society, they pointed out that many scientists and world leaders believe that climate change caused by greenhouse gas emissions is the most serious issue facing the human race today. Furthermore, in the article titled "Sustainable Diets for the Future," published in 2012 by McDermott et al. In the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, they state that meat and dairy products make the greatest contribution to greenhouse gases during the food production process. And so because meat and dairy production is adding to greenhouse gas production and ultimately affecting climate change, I'm here to propose today that we stop buying meat products and go to full-on vegetarian diets. Now, I have to acknowledge that I know we live in a country based on freedom, and it's not my place to tell you what to eat or how you should eat or anything like that, just because it's your right to choose how you want to live. But I do hope you pay attention to my speech, because I hope you do learn how the meat industry is producing greenhouse gases and ultimately impacting climate change and the future of our planet. So, in order to summarize the argument for a full-on vegetarian diet proposed by the Vegetarian Society, I made a simple diagram that starts with a food chain. And so all this is really saying is that we produce vegetables, and these vegetables are eaten by cattle, and then we go ahead and eat the cattle. And the reason I set this up is to show you what sort of goes in and what we get out of this food chain. Now this is very simplified, but for the most part to produce vegetables we use land and water, and then we feed these vegetables to our cattle, but these cattle also use land and water. So we're using these same resources twice to get one output. And then at the same time, while vegetables are actually taking up CO2 and producing oxygen, which is sort of reducing the greenhouse effect, cattle production actually produces a lot of greenhouse gases, such as methane, CO2, and nitrous oxide. And this is just natural with respiratory mammals. Respiratory mammals have to produce CO2 in order to survive. We do it. And cattle, because of their excretions and manure, and because of their excretions, they produce a lot of methane and nitrous oxide, which also add to the greenhouse effect. And so the big argument here is, let's just skip over this sort of middleman in the cattle. Instead of putting land and water towards cattle, which are eating the vegetables that we already put land and water to, let's just skip over them and eat only the vegetables. And so the big takeaways here are that the land and water that was used to produce the cows can now actually be used to help produce the vegetables. And so we're almost getting twice as much food with the same amount of resources. So not only do we get more food, but we're also going to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases because we're no longer buying and producing cattle. And so we ultimately reduce the total greenhouse effect that we experience. And so, not all agricultural systems are that simple. It's a very simplified model. However, there are agricultural systems that do reduce their amount of greenhouse emissions. There are organic farms and grass-fed cattle ranges that do reduce those emissions and are very clean systems. Unfortunately, though, most cattle production happens in feedlots like this, and what this basically is just a big area that tightly packs cattle into one space, and these cattle live on dirt patches, and there's not really any built-in sort of cleanness into this infrastructure. The cattle live in very poor conditions. They live in tight company. They don't feed on natural green grass. They feed on hay. And this infrastructure is just very industrialized and very dirty. There's not really anything built into this to reduce their emissions, and it's just not a very safe system for climate change. And so the big arguments against going to a full vegetarian diet are that, one, it's not really plausible to get get the whole society to adapt a full vegetarian diet, and then actually going full vegetarian and only producing vegetables might not be as efficient as we think it is. And to some degree that's true. There is data supporting the fact that a full vegetarian diet might not be as efficient as we think it is. However, switching to a more vegetarian diet can still be effective on reducing the amount of greenhouse gases. In the same article by McDermott et al., they found that diets that still include meat products, but in smaller quantities, can still reduce greenhouse emissions by 36%. And that's still a big reduction in the amount of greenhouse gases, even if we are still eating meat products. Quartz journalist Chase Purdy, in his article Being Vegan Isn't As Good for Humanity As You Think, published in August 2016, also shows that while vegan diets feed less people than the common omnivorous diet, a mostly plant-based diet with a little bit of meat on the side is the best way to go for environmental efficiency. And so what these articles are saying is that they're acknowledging that it might not be actually possible to get everyone to adapt an all-vegetarian diet. However, by switching to a more plant-based diet and limiting the amount of meat that we eat, we can still have a significant impact on our greenhouse emissions and do a better job at keeping our environment clean. So in conclusion, we see a lot of data that supports that meat and dairy production is adding a lot of greenhouse gases to our environment and ultimately contributing to climate change. And now, while it's going to be a slow process down the line, we can see that reducing the total amount of meat that we eat is plausible and will ultimately should be done because it's going to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we produce. While this speech might not have persuaded you to adapt a full-on vegetarian diet, I do hope that it did teach you something about how the meat industry is impacting greenhouse gases. It makes you a little more conscientious when you go to the store and decide on what you want to buy for dinner tonight. Thank you very much.